was the most important to the landscape of what today meant and potentially moving forward was the ACC championship game, which the lights were not necessarily the brightest on Duke playing Virginia, but I think that's the most meaningful game going forward. That's why we're having the discussions that we're going to have today, and that's probably why we're going to have the discussions we do moving forward the next few months.
Now, in terms of what's going to happen today and how that impacts Oklahoma, I know that the last few weeks of the regular season, there were a lot of conversations about who should be in, who had positioned themselves to really, I think, like earn a spot before championship weekend ultimately played out. I kind of felt like going into the final 2 weeks of the season after Oklahoma had beaten Tennessee and Alabama on the road that they controlled their destiny. At that point, I thought, you beat Missouri at home, you beat LSU, you're in, and no matter what argument anybody comes up with, I don't care if the offense hasn't been good. I don't care what kind of arguments you're going to come up with. Oklahoma's strength of schedule was so good at that point. I thought they were in. So going into this weekend, to me, the drama with Oklahoma was completely out the window. Oklahoma was in. It was just a matter of who are they going to play, and will they end up getting a home game, or will they have to go on the road depending on how championship weekend played out?
Right, and there were two games that you were looking at, Georgia and Alabama. I don't know how much they're going to penalize teams that lost in their conference championship game, and I'm sure we're going to have that discussion coming up here in a little bit. But you can reward teams for winning their conference championship, and I think that's going to be most of the movement that we see today. Alabama, by winning that game, I think would have, even though they lost at home to Oklahoma, I think they still would have justifiably moved past the Sooners for winning that championship game. And I think the other game that you look at is the Big 12 championship game. I don't think Texas Tech falls below Oklahoma if they lose that one. BYU, I think, does jump in front of some other teams who didn't participate in championship weekend, and both went according to plan for OU. So I think you're looking at an Oklahoma team that is more than likely, overwhelmingly likely, going to be the number 8 seed in this tournament and is going to play a home game in Norman in the playoff.
I went through about every possible scenario that could have taken place championship weekend to find any way that Oklahoma potentially gets left out. I couldn't find it. Now, obviously, the committee can just decide out of nowhere they don't like Oklahoma anymore and do whatever they want to do. But outside of something ridiculous like that happening, Oklahoma was in. The worst case scenario to me would have been Alabama, as you said, beating Georgia, jumping over Oklahoma. That knocks OU down one spot. And then BYU winning, I think they would have jumped Oklahoma as well. The 10 seed to me would have been Oklahoma's worst case scenario. Both of those teams lost on championship weekend. I don't think Oklahoma moves at all. They were number 8 3 weeks in a row. I think they're going to be number 8 in this final ranking here in about 30 to 45 minutes. And it's a matter of, I think Alabama, potentially Notre Dame, potentially Miami. I think those are really the only 3 opponents that are in play for the Sooners. But for Sooner fans, you do not have to book travel to, potentially College Station or anywhere else in the first round. December 19th and December 20th are the first round playoff games. December 19th is a Friday. There's one game that night, and then there's a Saturday triple header for these first round games. But Oklahoma is going to be hosting a game in one of those time slots ultimately, and the question is, will it be an Alabama rematch? Will it be Notre Dame? Will it be Miami? I mean, I think you get the luxury of having some pretty big-time brands ultimately coming to Norman, regardless of which one it is. I'll ask you before we talk about who should get it, do you have a preference on what you would like to see?
You don't want to see Alabama again. Now, if you're an Oklahoma fan, that might be the team that you most want to play against. Some fans are probably, we beat them once. I don't know if we can do it again. But because you've already beaten them on the road, I think that's the team that you want to play. Miami was really up and down this season. You don't know what version of them that you're necessarily going to get. Notre Dame finished the season really strong. It was just a question of who they played.
Right.
And that's something that the committee is talking about right now, if this boils down to those 3 teams on who should get in. But I think if you're Oklahoma, I think you want to play. I think you'd want to play Alabama again. I don't think the committee is going to put them in that position, though. They don't like rematches, especially in this close proximity. It was just a few weeks ago.
just selfishly from like, who do I want to see play football? I saw Alabama play football a few weeks ago. I was in Tuscaloosa for that game. I think Oklahoma probably beats them again, especially if this game is in Norman. Alabama feels like they're leaking oil a little bit. I selfishly just want to see Notre Dame. I've never seen Notre Dame in person. It's one of the blue blood programs of college football. I mean, Miami is still a big brand as well, but I mean, to have OU and Notre Dame, those two brands on the field together for a college football playoff game from a history standpoint, I mean, it's Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame. I mean, those are probably the Rushmore brands of college football. Selfishly, I would love to see Notre Dame. As far as what should happen, this is where things get really tricky because I mean, you have everybody, and their dog giving an opinion on this whole like Notre Dame Miami situation, on whether Alabama should be penalized for playing in a conference championship. There's not a right answer ultimately, and this is the way that college football's always been, right? There's no such thing as comparing apples to apples in college football. It doesn't exist because nobody is playing by the same set of rules. Nobody is playing the same level of competition week in, week out. Conferences are not created equal. I mean, there's no way to say what applies to you also applies to you. So there's never going to be a right or wrong answer necessarily. Right. But I think in this situation, the first thing I would throw out is penalizing a team for losing on championship weekend, to me, is wild. I get that they got blown out, and some people are going to say, well, what about BYU? Here's the massive difference for all the people that want to compare Alabama and BYU and say, well, if Alabama can get blown out in their conference championship game and stay in the tournament, why doesn't BYU get a shot? BYU wasn't in the college football playoff field yesterday before they played.
Right.
They lost. They're still not in. I mean, just because Alabama lost and doesn't get knocked out doesn't mean BYU moves into the bracket. They weren't in the bracket anyway. They had the opportunity to play their way in, and they didn't do that. Alabama had the opportunity to obviously elevate themselves, and they didn't do that. Both stay put. Alabama's still in the bracket. BYU is still out of the bracket. That's the big difference, I think, when people start talking about Alabama and BYU losing this weekend and what should ultimately happen.
So here's what I always think about 2 weeks out, is the committee is telling you a story. And that's why they put teams where they do in the final 2 weeks of their projected rankings, is to really cover up for some of the announcements that they're going to make and prepare for those type of scenarios. And I think that's why there was as much space between Miami and Notre Dame as there was. Yeah. If they were just side by side, of course, instantly you go to the matchup, or Miami would have been ranked ahead of them anyway. Alabama was really, I think, a buffer in between those two teams to where Alabama's 9, you know they're not going to end up at 9. They can use Alabama as a space holder, move somebody up, get away from the rematch. We didn't want to have that again. Alabama moves to 10. It's not too penalizing from the loss in the SEC championship game. Notre Dame, or whoever it is, moves up there. I think it's Notre Dame, since they were already in the rankings. I don't see how today, I certainly see how you could move Miami ahead of Notre Dame. Oh, just imagine if they played each other, what would happen? They did. We already know who won that game. But because Notre Dame was where they were to begin with, and there was that space between them and Miami, I think they're telling a story there, and I think that's why we get to where we get to today. Yeah,
comparing these three teams is, I mean, whatever argument you make for one of them, I think you could probably use that same argument between the other two, and it doesn't apply, right? Or it maybe completely contradicts what you originally tried to make the argument for. I mean, with these three teams, who has the best win, right? I mean, Alabama certainly has the best win, and that was the win at Georgia. Right. They lost a rematch against a team they already beat. I don't know how much they're going to get penalized. Obviously, it was a blowout, but you lost to a team that you've already beat this season, so I don't know how much you get penalized for that. Strength of schedule, of all the teams that we're going to talk about, which I think we're talking about 13 total today, I think we know the top 8 are all in. Tulane and James Madison probably are in. I mean, maybe Duke. I don't think Duke's going to get in, but
Tulane is certainly in.
Tulane is in 100%.
James Madison is probably about 90%.
But it really comes down to, I think, Alabama, Miami, and Notre Dame,
Yeah.
2 of those getting in and 1 of them getting left out. The best win, without question, is Alabama's win over Georgia. They lose the rematch. People want to say, but they're not playing good football at the end of the season, and that's what's really important. Okay, fair enough. They were playing good football at some point, but they're not playing good football now. Well, do you apply that to Notre Dame? Because if you use that logic, Notre Dame lost their first two games of the season with a freshman quarterback,
Right.
and now they've won 10 straight, and you can make the argument they're playing as good as anybody in the country. Yeah. So if Alabama gets penalized for playing poorly down the stretch, then Notre Dame gets rewarded for playing well down the stretch, and that in turn, I think, demotes the Miami over Notre Dame head-to-head that happened in week number 2 or week number 1, whenever that game was played. So, there's just so many different ways you can look at this and use different criteria that potentially takes away from somebody else's argument or maybe your own argument with 2 of the other teams.
Yeah, and what this is going to morph into eventually, because there are so many big established brands that are just painfully close on the cutting room floor, and then you're watching games with James Madison and Tulane, is the continual evolution and I think expansion of the playoff. But concerning this year, I think that you still have an opportunity to not punish somebody. It's different punishing somebody and moving them down a couple of places. Where does Indiana and Ohio State?
Right.
Obviously, Indiana's going to be number 1, but where would they have been if they had lost? Where's Ohio State going to be because of their loss? Because you can say, hey, they're at 4. We're not penalizing Ohio State. We're rewarding Texas Tech and Georgia for winning their conference championship games.
That's
that means something. Alabama, you're not necessarily penalizing them, but moving them down a spot I think is a little bit more understandable, and it's certainly more understandable than moving them completely out of the playoff.
Moving them out would be a penalty.
Yes.
Moving them down in the rankings doesn't necessarily penalize them. I think it just probably reaffirms what the committee thought 2 weeks ago when they had Notre Dame ahead of Alabama, and then were wildly impressed by Alabama's win at Auburn, which was really ugly, and Auburn had every chance to win the game and basically shot themselves in the foot.
Again, I think they did that to remedy whatever this Notre Dame-Miami situation is going to be. I think they foresaw what was going to happen there, who they liked more, and I think they wanted to get out ahead of that. So
what I think is going to happen, not what I believe should happen, what I think is going to happen, I think you're going to get Indiana number 1. We may have the bracket here that I foresee the committee going with.
Colby's crystal ball.
Yeah, Indiana, I think, is clearly the number 1 choice. I think Georgia, the committee will move Georgia to the 2 spot. I think Ohio State drops to the 3 spot.
Oh, and really? Ahead of Texas Tech?
Ahead of Texas Tech, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, they were dominantly number 1 the entire season, lost a 3-point game. I think that, there we go. This is what I think is going to happen. Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas Tech get the first-round byes. I think Oregon stays at 5. Maybe there's a small world where Ole Miss and A&M swap spots, and they can justify it because Lane Kiffin left.
Coaching change,
But I do think Ole Miss stays at 6. I think A&M stays at 7. I think Oklahoma stays at 8. I think Notre Dame moves up 1 spot ahead of Alabama. I think Alabama moves down to 10. And then obviously I think it's Tulane and James Madison getting the other automatic conference champion qualifiers. The real, I think, interesting part of this bracket is if you just keep Alabama where they are, you keep Notre Dame where they are, and Tulane naturally falls in that 11 spot, ahead of James Madison, which is where they're currently at. You have 3 first-round rematches. If you don't swap Alabama and Notre Dame, you would have OU and Alabama, you would have A&M and Notre Dame, you would have Ole Miss and Tulane. All 3 of those games already happened this year. The committee says they don't pay attention to matchups and they don't try to avoid rematches and all that. I'm really curious how this potentially holds up, because Ole Miss beat Tulane 45-10, I believe, earlier in the season. It was not competitive at all. We've already seen Alabama OU. We've already seen A&M Notre Dame. So I'm very curious to see potentially how they juggle these matchups and ultimately try to avoid having rematches?
I think you nailed it. I think the one thing that I could see change, because I think you're right on about the rematches, Notre Dame moving spots with Alabama. I think the one thing that is interesting is, why do you wedge Ohio State in between an SEC champion, Georgia, and a Big 12 champion, Texas Tech? And one of the reasons why would be prior matchups, because if you put Ohio State at 4, they're in Indiana's side of the bracket.
Yeah.
You could see that again. But I think it's going to be harder to justify why you put Ohio State behind Georgia and not behind Texas Tech, because both of those teams won their conference championships. And Texas Tech, a one-loss team, certainly not as strong of a league as the Big Ten was this season. There's probably part of something that goes into that. I could definitely see that playing out, but I think that would have to be something they would have to answer for at the end of the day.
Well, and I think that they could easily justify Ohio State ahead of Texas Tech, because Ohio State just lost. They lost. They were number 1 the entire year. They lost to the number 1 team in the country.
Right.
I mean, Texas Tech lost to Arizona State at some point, right?
But then why wouldn't you have them ahead of Georgia? And still think that they're the number 2 team in the country. So, and they could do that too.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia avenged its only loss on the season. I mean, that's, I think, the easy way to justify.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying these are the questions that they're going to
definitely valid. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Ohio State drops to 4. I just think there's a stronger argument for Georgia avenging its only loss to be ahead of Ohio State versus Texas Tech beating BYU for a second time, and both BYU wins being their best wins of the season. I think the only other ranked win they had this year was Utah. So I guess Texas Tech is the Utah State champions, having 3 wins over BYU twice and Utah. But, I mean, Texas Tech's resume overall, when you look at top 25 wins or quality wins, they're not there. And I think Texas Tech is really good. Defensively, obviously, they are the best they've ever been by a country mile. They have playmakers offensively. I think Tech is a real threat to make a run in the college football playoff. But in terms of resume, I think they would have to be undefeated to jump ahead of either Georgia or Ohio State if all those teams are sitting with the same record.
What about the Mississippi factor? You touched on that, and you said you could see some movement. Yeah. Because there has been precedent on teams moving around in the playoffs based on player availability. What about coaching situation?
I think it's, if they want to avoid the Ole Miss Tulane, because if everything stays the way we perceive it to be, you're going to get a rematch of Ole Miss Tulane in the first round. Again, 45-10, I think, was the final score of that game. If they want to avoid it, it's easy to say, you know what, after thinking about this, Lane Kiffin not being there, we question how good Ole Miss will be going forward, so we're going to drop them a spot with Texas A&M. And I don't think many people would complain too much about that because, again, the Jordan Travis situation a few years ago, they said Florida State's not the same team without this quarterback. They could say, we don't think Ole Miss is the same team without Lane Kiffin. And, it's not going to be – because Lane Kiffin's not a player, maybe it's not to the point of drop them out like they did with Florida State. But, I think they could potentially use that as a tool to avoid a first-round matchup. When you look at the two resumes, though, I mean, they're very, very similar. A&M's one-loss rivalry game to Texas, I think, who's ranked, number 13 or 14 in the country. Ole Miss's only loss is to Georgia in a game that they led most of the way and ultimately fell short. I think quality wins. They're both right about even. I mean, the two resumes side by side are very, very close, and I think you could easily just say resume-wise, pick one or the other, and if you want to justify Lane Kiffin not being there, I think it's really easy to make the swap.
The problem is, now that we think about it, because they already had time to think about this and put the ranking down the way that it was.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be harder to justify that because they already had an opportunity to discuss this in the room.
Right.
Now, they might have thought that it was going to be Mississippi playing Virginia at the end of the season, and this does give them a quote-unquote out.
Right.
But I think if they thought that that was a possibility, they would have already done it. But we'll see.
I would agree with that. I just think that that's a card they
Yes,
can potentially
yes.
play. I don't think that's going to happen. That's why in my projection I didn't have that happening.
Yeah.
I just think it's a card they could potentially
Yes.
play
Yep.
if they wanted to really try to avoid first-round matchups. All right, we've got Colin Kennedy joining us, who covers Oklahoma with 24/7 Sports, one of the sharpest minds in the country covering college football. Colin, my friend, it's been way too long since we've done this. Thanks for joining us this morning. Obviously, there's very little drama with the Sooners. I mean, they're in. It's just a matter of who the first-round opponent might be.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, what a day, right? How awesome is this to have this type of stuff going on in the state and around Oklahoma football? And then secondly, I do love the fact that, like you mentioned, there's not a whole lot of chaos going on the OU front, but at the same time, the Sooners are very much involved in a heated debate in the sport, one of several, you could say. It makes it a little bit fun, but I'm very much looking forward to the bracket reveal, guys. It's gonna be really cool.
Colin, who, as it stands right now, who do you anticipate Oklahoma playing in the first round of the college football playoff?
I believe it's Notre Dame. I don't know about you guys. I think the best way that I can phrase it is, for me, if the committee were to put Miami over Notre Dame at the last minute, then they would basically be telling on themselves and showing to billions that they just didn't do their homework, right? I don't know how much incentive there is in that. I don't know how good that is for business. And I honestly think that, speaking to the chaos in the debate, while Oklahoma is in and that is settled, and we pretty much know that going into this, they're going to host a college football playoff game in Norman, there is a lot on the line for this committee, right? Like, there are going to be several decisions within this bracket reveal that basically determine whether or not this thing is valid moving forward, whether this process makes any sense. And I come from it from a place of, well, if they have shown you how they feel up until this point, I understand the arguments here and there. But for them, simply from an operational standpoint, I don't know how feasible it is to put Miami in at the last minute over Notre Dame, having had Notre Dame over the Canes this long. That's where I'm coming from it. I hear a number of arguments, and I will see them through, certainly. I just look at the committee specifically and say, on a day that they have to make a lot of decisions for themselves as well, I think it's Notre Dame slotting in there with Oklahoma.
I think in terms of the College Football Playoff Committee and any idea that they're trying to preserve their relevance with the future of the sport, I would ask you this: what is more damning to their future? Is it leaving out the ACC altogether, or potentially like dropping Alabama out of this thing and the SEC's #1 seed going into championship weekend gets left out because they lost to a team that they've already beat this year? I personally think Alabama getting left out would be far more damning to this College Football Playoff Committee's future, and I guess Greg Sankey deciding to wield the power that he has versus leaving, the ACC out, who, let's be honest, their bad decision making in terms of their conference tiebreakers is what got them in this scenario.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that leaving out Alabama would stir this thing into some serious controversy, and I think that's another layer to this as well. Is obviously, as we know, there's the Oklahoma stuff that's settled, the Miami Notre Dame debate. But then we really get into what I believe is kind of the determining factor for this committee on this day, which is, how do they truly view conference championship games? And what do those mean for your resume, both good and bad? Because if I remember correctly, last year, every single team that played in the conference title game and lost dropped at least one spot. Now, I don't know that necessarily kept several teams out of the field altogether, but I do believe that Alabama is going to fall, especially, I believe, after scoring tied for the fewest points over the last 25 SEC title games. I think there's justification to drop the Tide down, but just how far, I don't know. And if it goes a little too far, like you're talking about, then all of a sudden we're saying, well, why would you even play in the conference title games? Is this just a money grab at this point? And I would hear any argument or feeling in that notion too. So for me, like, look, it would be certainly a shame to see a quote unquote Power Four conference be left portion of the country. But at the same time, given the circumstances and where Alabama fits into this whole equation and what they participated in as it relates to the playoff, right? I think that the Alabama situation is fascinating to me because I do believe that they will drop. How far, though, is going to be another layer to how we view this committee and what might need to happen or not happen moving forward.
Is there any other movement that you anticipate ahead of Oklahoma? For instance, how far Ohio State would fall in the rankings? Is there a coaching change swap with Mississippi at the last moment? What do you anticipate in those higher seeds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I personally think that's another like sneaky layer to this too that's kind of tricky to evaluate because I think obviously Indiana is going to be number one. We know that as a given, but then how do you view Ohio State as 2 or 3? Because Georgia getting that win over Alabama, avenging that loss, right? And then winning out in an SEC title game, that to me carries a ton of weight. And on top of that too, again, Georgia basically dominated Alabama. And so it's one thing to win it. It's another to avenge your loss and do so handily. I feel like the 2 to 3 situation is going to have maybe not necessarily a trickle down effect, but you feel like it could certainly determine the way that this bracket shakes out because of the draws and things of that nature. I kind of believe that the committee will keep Ohio State at number 2 because if you truly viewed those two teams as your top 2 and one lost to the other by 3 points, all of them missed field goal, right? I feel like the committee is going to put Ohio State at 2. That's my current lean. Do I agree or disagree? I don't know that I'm all that convicted one way or another to have a strong opinion on it. However, I think Georgia certainly has a case for the number 2 seed. Ohio State, if they do drop down to the 3rd slot, curious to see what social media is going to look like, but that's what I'm eyeing right now is, okay, what else does the committee tell us through these conference championship games by how they slot the 2 and 3 seeds?
I definitely think it's more likely Ohio State is 2 than 4. If we're figuring out, how far down they slide and not necessarily going in the 3 spot, which I think a lot of people just naturally project.
Sure.
Colin, in terms of the 3 possibilities for Oklahoma, I think, if Miami gets in, they're obviously in play for that 9 spot. I'm with you. I think it's going to be Notre Dame. In the world where they say, you know what, Alabama, you lost, we're going to keep you at number 9, that's also in play, although I think it's unlikely. What's the best of those 3 matchups for the Sooners, and what's the worst of those 3 matchups for the Sooners?
So I'll do you one better too. Number 1, I believe, and I think you guys would agree, the most fun would be Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Norman, right?
Without
I think
question,
that's what everyone would love to
Yeah.
see. I think that's what would garner the most social media hype. I think that would be a fascinating matchup. Great uni matchup too. So much about Oklahoma, Notre Dame in Norman would be, commanding the college football landscape's attention. I believe the best matchup, though, would be Miami. I know a number of folks over there at the SMU coaching staff, and they're obviously looming large in this thing, having beaten Miami in Dallas a couple weeks ago. I know SMU felt very confident in its ability to force Carson Beck into some turnovers, and that's exactly what they did. We've seen Carson Beck at quarterback become a little bit turnover prone or, prone to mistakes in general on some of the biggest stages. Mario Cristobal, sometimes the mismanaging stuff can show up. I think that Miami's a really good football team. I think they have an elite defensive line. I think they're a really fun watch, but I think that Brent Venables and that defense would be able to give Miami's offense fits. And I think from there, you would be able to potentially figure some things out against the Canes coming into a cold Norman, Oklahoma. The worst for me is got to be Alabama, right? I think number 1, it would be a buzzkill. I don't think anyone wants to see that for the 3rd time in however many months. And then if you draw the Crimson Tide looking to make a statement and you've already had to play them this many times over the last year or so, and I think that you just never would want to draw a team overly familiar with your tendencies in a field like the playoff. that's the way I see it. I think Notre Dame would be the most fun, potentially more evenly matched too, which would add even more intrigue. Miami for me would be one where you start to feel really good about your odds. And Alabama, I don't really want to see it, to be honest with you.
The last question from me, Colin. Part of this is about the excitement and anticipation of OU being in the college football playoff. Another part of this is, the celebration of this unlikely yet incredible season for Oklahoma. For you personally, because I think people probably had different moments, was there a part of the season, a part of a game, a play, whatever it might be, that you look back at and it took you from the mindset of, hey, this is a really good OU football team, to, hey, this is an OU football team that can play for a national championship this year?
I think you have to look at the 2 road games this year with the wins over Tennessee and Alabama, just being in those environments and watching this team operate. I thought at Tennessee, when they really started to create the turnover snowball, because before that, it had kind of lingered over them. They finally start forcing teams into mistakes with that caliber of defense, and you're sitting there going, man, if they can keep this up, this is an entirely different team. They're already a pretty good one. And then in that game, Xavier Robinson, I remember, runs it into the end zone, having fumbled earlier. I believe he goes for 100+ in that game. And I thought, if they've got the special teams and they've got a defense that is elite but able to create mistakes, and they've got a run game, that is a formula, a recipe for success, right? And then I will say this too, the Alabama game, certainly. Man, when Alabama converts on that 4th down, and there were certain individuals in the press box cheering out in Tuscaloosa that day, I thought, man, they got close. And then all of a sudden, they get a sack, and they find a way to pull that win out. And I would say right after that 4th down give up into the negative play created, and you're seeing them force Alabama into some frantic mode. I sat there in that press box and thought, man, like they're going to go do this. They're going to go to the college football playoff, and what an outstanding season for them. That program, this fan base has a lot to be proud of. Think about where we were at the start of this year too, guys. Like, I mean, time flies, the narratives change. We know the tables can turn, but wow, it has been one heck of a run. I'm curious to see what else they can do in the college football playoff, but this stretch, that Red November run, if you will, was a lot of fun to watch, especially when you consider what was on the line.
When he asked you that question, I was just waiting for you to answer November, because it just kind of felt like everything that happened in November was like, again, there's been so many references to the 2000 team. The month of November for this Sooners team has been absolutely magical. The 2 road wins, the 2, home wins that were probably more dramatic than they needed to be, and you find ways to win late against both Missouri and LSU. But I want to throw this question at you. Oklahoma's in. They beat LSU. At that point, I think we knew they were going to be in. It was just, are they going to be at home? Are they going to be on the road? What's the opponent going to be? How realistic to you is the possibility of them actually making a run in this thing? Because most likely, again, we've talked about the first round options. It's probably going to be Indiana in the second round if they're the 8 seed and Indiana's the 1 seed. The defense to me gives them a chance to compete against anybody. I know the offense doesn't get a lot of credit and gets a lot of criticism, rightfully so. I will say you probably have some healthy running backs by the time Oklahoma starts playing again, which wasn't the case, the last few weeks of the season. That drastically changes the way that this Sooner team potentially plays. But what is their ceiling in terms of making a run in this playoff for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a lot of feelings on it, but to sum it up briefly, I absolutely give this Oklahoma team a shot to advance a round or two in this playoff and certainly see how far that they can go, because you look at Notre Dame, if that is the draw, you think about the rush defense, Oklahoma's capability on that side of the ball. Notre Dame, Carr's playing well at quarterback. They've got that monster duo at running back. They're a really good football team, Notre Dame, and Marcus Freeman certainly helping on all phases. But I think that is one of the couple of draws you would have preferred going into this, right? Certainly. And then when you look ahead, you don't want to get too far ahead of the skis, but I think that the thing you have to factor in is, number one, Oklahoma navigated the back end of its schedule with both top running backs in the red of the health bar, right? And they just simply tried to navigate that. And I think there was a lot of frustration about, well, why can't they run the ball? Why won't they run the ball? Because they were trying to protect their guys, knowing a postseason run was ahead of them. And I think that when you have that recipe that I was talking about with the Tennessee game, if they can run the ball and play that caliber defense, and then this is what I would point to as well, Colby, like to your question, if they play Notre Dame and they play the way that I think that they can with those backs healthy in that defense, they go on to play Indiana. That's certainly a tough draw. I think Indiana is a good football team, but we just watched the Big Ten title game last night, guys. Special teams. I mean, special teams is a huge layer to this game, especially in the postseason, and the Sooners have been elite in the third phase. I think you have to consider that. I think when you put it all together, if it does come together for them, because they got to get healthy, Oklahoma has the makings of a team that can make things interesting in the playoff, and I certainly give them those odds.
It should be a lot of fun to watch play out. Ultimately, Colin, we got to figure out who the first round opponent is. They've got to get past that first round before they even think about Indiana. No matter who it's going to be, I think just playing in this type of circumstance, playoffs, I mean, the giant spotlight, it's going to be a tough challenge. It's going to be a ton of fun either way, though. And, Colin, we'll let you run, and we'll watch this thing ultimately get revealed and go from there.
All right, let's have some more fun today, guys.
That is Colin Kennedy with 24/7 Sports covering the Oklahoma Sooners, doing a great job. Always appreciate Colin's analysis. As we get ready to start listening to the committee give us these rankings, you know, I hear over the last few weeks, like, Oklahoma got outgained by 200 yards against Alabama, and I totally get that argument. When your defense is creating turnovers and special teams is doing what they did in that game, I mean, Tate Sandell's been arguably the best kicker in college football this season. They blocked a field goal against Alabama. They forced a punt return fumble. You know, the defense was creating turnovers. You don't have to roll the dice offensively, right, when the other elements of your team are playing that well. Later in the season, you don't have the running backs, and like against LSU, you throw 3 interceptions because you can't run the ball, and you have to put the ball in the air. They don't ideally want to play that type of football, even though I think when John Mateer came here, that was the plan. This defense and special teams has shown to be good enough to win you games that if you can just protect the football, you're going to be in great shape against anybody.
How frequently does the most crowd-pleasing offensive style win the national championship?
Rarely.
I mean, I'm sure it's happened before on a few occasions, but it's just about finding a way to win. And this Oklahoma team does that, and they can do that offensively too. They can break a big run when they need to. Mateer has shown his ability in critical times this year to make some really clutch plays for them. I really like their receiving core and you know, some of the big time plays that they've made this season. So and we've already, every OU fan knows this, the defense is going to keep them in position to make those plays. So if you're looking at a team that probably, and it's easy to look at the last 2 weeks and say, well, this is a team that is prone for a first-round loss. I look at this team and the way they performed all season long and say, this is a team that nobody wants to play.
Right.
They have no desire to play this team because they are dangerous. They will find a way to stay in the game just long enough to beat you no matter who you are.
I mean, we saw Lincoln Riley teams get to this point, right, and fail miserably because they were great offensively and god-awful defensively. And what does everybody always say? Defense wins championships. And look, I think given OU's schedule, I know the rankings don't say they're the #1 defense in the country, and they're not far off from it. But given their schedule, which I think is much tougher than any of the teams out of the Big Ten or even some of the other SEC teams, that's the best defense in the country for my money, and that defense will give them a chance to beat anybody. Now, I am also of the opinion that if the offense turns the ball over, they could lose to anybody in this field as well.
No question.
I am not at all excusing some of the shortcomings of the offense, but that defense gives you a chance against everybody you play, and if you have healthy running backs, I think it just limits the risk associated with that offense potentially giving a game away.
And they have. The only time where the defense gave up significant plays on a consistent basis was the home game against Mississippi. It really didn't happen the rest of the season. And that's about as complete of a defense as you can remember at Oklahoma, and probably that is playing today in college football when you look over the entirety of the resume.
Yeah. A lot of people don't like the committee. They don't like, you know, like, big shocker here, right? We're breaking news. A lot of people don't like the committee, don't like some of the justification for the committee's decision making. And I think that's really the biggest part of it, right? The committee, I think over the years at times has done a really poor job of justifying some of the decisions they've made. People want to see, like, take the human element out of it, go back to the computers. The BCS computers throughout the entirety of the college football playoff have pretty much matched what the committee has done. And for all the people that have hated how the Notre Dame-Miami situation has been handled, the Alabama situation, the BCS computers have completely agreed with the committee with having Notre Dame and Alabama ahead of Miami throughout this entire run.
Wow. That's kind of amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we would be in the same place. Again, for the committee, if I am in that room and it's almost impossible to do this, but you can see the gears turning over the last couple of weeks, informing the narrative of the decisions that they would ultimately make. Why it's impossible is there's so many different things that can happen and so many different things that you could hardly anticipate happening, but they've got to have some kind of flow chart in there that's like, if this, then that,
right?
You know, and
right.
Prepare for every kind of scenario in which they would have to come to an agreement of why this team is in over this team, even though they have a similar resume, or there might be something that would put Team B over the top of Team A. And I don't envy those guys at all.
Yeah.
They know that they're not going to get a lot of praise to begin with, and I think for the most part they have got it right. Today they are in an unwinnable situation because of head-to-head matchups and because of the way this thing is structured. You have two teams playing in this that almost nobody thinks are two of the top 12 teams in the country.
Yeah, I mean, and think of the brands that are potentially in the mix here. Alabama, Notre Dame, Miami, all big brands in the sport. You're going to have a massive fan base, no matter which team you leave out, being upset with the way that the committee justifies the decision-making process. And once again, I mean, I go back to one of the points I made when we started this. In college football, there's no possible way to compare apples to apples,
right,
oranges to oranges. When you talk about Alabama playing in the SEC, you talk about Tulane and their non-conference opponents and their conference opponents, Miami and the schedule they played. I mean, if you want to give them head-to-head over Notre Dame, then you got to give Notre Dame, you know, playing well down the stretch over Alabama. Then you know, the people that think conference championship appearances
right,
and you know, you should be penalized for that has to matter. There's no right way to do. Again, there's no way that you could ever put a flow chart out that properly,
right,
I think, like makes everybody happy. You're always going to find circumstances where that flow chart has to be burned and torn up and you know, completely demolished from the stratosphere because it's not going to make sense.
The answer to that would be, and Texas fans and Vanderbilt fans, who they just went 10-2 in the SEC and had one of their probably their best season ever, would say, hey, next year, this is going to help us now, but next year or 2 years on down the line, how about increasing this to 16, or I think we'll ultimately get to a place of 24, so that you can reward teams that are toward the top of the bracket and give them a bye or perhaps two, just based on what they accomplished. And I think this year, it's not going to be that final domino to fall, but I think it's going to be that first domino that starts to push us in that direction, because there are so many teams that are painfully close that television executives are going to ask this committee and say, hey, is there any way maybe we could squeeze just a few more so we make sure this doesn't happen again?
You know, this is the last year of this current format, and there are still meetings that have to take place before they decide what the next format is going to be. It's not going to be this format. I can assure you of that. There is no way this format is coming back. It may be a different version of the 12-team playoff. I'm
just glad they didn't keep the old one. Otherwise, Tulane was going to be hosting.
Tulane is.
They were going to have a bye.
A first-round bye.
So I'm glad they changed it from last year.
And it's going to change again. I think it's going to grow once again. And we talked about this when the 4-team format was changed to the 12-team. I mean, we're just changing the argument from teams 3, 4, 5, and 6 to teams 11, 12, 13, 14. That's going to happen when it grows again, right? Whether that's 16 or 24, we're just going to change the argument to, Hey man, 8-4 Missouri in the SEC definitely deserves it over 9-3 Utah in the Big 12. I mean,
And there are so many more of
right.
those teams
It
that
happens,
have those arguments.
It happens in the 68-team college basketball, right? Like we're talking about these bubble teams and what a disgrace it is that a bubble team was left out of the college basketball tournament when there's 68 teams getting it.
And that's the question, Colby, is how far can you go and think that you have included a team that has a legitimate chance to win this tournament? And some people thought 12 was too many. Some people think that the teams that are 8, 9, 10, 12 don't have a chance to win this thing. But can you go to 16? Could you go to 24? And you're just, at that point, it's not a participation trophy, but you're trying to reward anybody who did win a conference championship or did have 2 or 3 solid wins on the season in a big time conference. But could the number 20, the number 21 team in the country have a legitimate argument to winning this tournament? I don't know.
I don't think they do, but I also think that we probably should have some sort of structure where Alabama, Miami, and Notre Dame are playing their way into these teams that we perceive as bubble teams. Should have to play their way in, and I think 16 for me is the sweet spot. A 16-team playoff to me is the perfect amount. I do want some sort of reward system, though, for Indiana and Ohio State and these teams that are at the very top. I also think that the more inclusion we have, the more money is made for college football. My idea is I'm going to call it a 16-team playoff, but it's actually a 24-team, but nobody likes the sound of 24-team.
Okay, all right.
So what you do is you have 8 teams that punch their way in, and then you have 16 teams that have play-in games. And the winner of those, which is essentially playoff games. But the way you word it, I think, just helps the 16-team playoff be a little bit more feasible and maybe, because again, I don't think the number 20 team in the country has a legit chance to win a national championship. But they could play a game that determines whether somebody else is a contender or pretender, right? So you give the top 8 a first-round bye. You have the next 8 play, teams, 17 through 24. The winners of those games get slotted in, and there's your 16-team playoff, which is actually a 24-team playoff. But and it's lots of money for the TV people who would love an extra round, basically.
I think it makes sense, and it's only going to be a few more years before those execs realize, hey, there's a couple of weekends in December where we're not playing games. Can we put some games there? So I think that happens sooner rather than later. I think there could be like a 2-tiered bye system where I think the top 4 get an additional week off based on the seasons that they had, because those are typically going to be your conference championship teams from those 4 big leagues. So it'll be interesting to figure out, but I do think we'll see some movement on that front, especially after today.
And when I think you have to throw conference championship games out the window. I mean, at this point, it's nonsense. Like, imagine the NFL taking the top teams from, like, the division winners and making them play an extra game while all the wild card teams just sit back and say, I'm getting a bye, and then I'm going to play you guys, and maybe one of you gets left out because you lost, having to play this extra weekend. Like, it's absolutely absurd. I think you got to get rid of conference championships. And again, everybody says there's too much money to be made. That's the weekend you throw all these play-in games, right? I mean, you can make more money, in fact, by having more meaningful games. And obviously, the college football schedule needs to be changed in general, right? We need to start the season earlier. We don't need this long break between playoff games. I mean, that I think would fix a lot of the NIL issues, would fix the transfer portal issues, would fix the coaching carousel issues. Start the season earlier, get through the season, championship weekend, have a play-in round of games, and then immediately after, you start the college football playoff, and there's not like this weird part of the season that basically like half the teams are checked out of, and players are entering the portal, and coaches are saying goodbye to their teams even though they're still playing. Like it just, but that makes way too much sense for college football to buy into.
No, I've been working with you for years. I don't know if I've ever agreed with you this much. No, I think you're making some outstanding points.
Maybe I'm just matured.
No, in terms of the calendar and how to use that to your advantage, because when you're competing not head to head but going on at the same time as the NFL playoffs, that's only going to divert attention away from you. And I feel like they can use August a little bit more to their advantage than they've ever been able to, because the idea that you're competing with a scholastic schedule anymore, I think we've all kind of come to the conclusion that was
Beyond ridiculous.
A little bit of a facade to
Yeah.
begin with, and so I think they're safe to do that.
Yeah. By the way, currently on the selection show, this graphic just popped up. CFP selection principles: strength of schedule, head-to-head competition, comparative outcomes of common opponents, which I think is absolutely absurd, because how one team matches up with somebody might be completely different to how somebody else matches up with somebody.
Might play them the first week, might play them when they have a key
you
injury.
might play them at home,
Right.
somebody else plays them on the road in bad weather.
Completely
it's just,
agree.
Again, that is such an absurd way to evaluate things, but again, that's part of college football. And here's the other one. Unavailability of key players and coaches
There we go.
that may have affected performance or likely will affect postseason performance.
I wonder if there's
That's
a
on
reason.
the graphic that they're showing.
I wonder if there's a reason why they put that up today, Colby.
And look, maybe it's just to create a little bit more drama for what's going to take place. But like I said, I did feel like going into today, that was a card that they had in their pocket that they could play. And I think when I look at this, I put myself in that chair and I think, like, if a bunch of people around me were going to make a bad choice that I had to justify, like, how would I try to justify it? And that's the way that I try to think of, like, how this thing might work and how they might try to present different scenarios. And that's why I thought that was definitely a possibility.
No, absolutely. That's a good exercise to have to work backward from where you end up. And the Miami Notre Dame thing is going to be the most key decision out of all of these, unless Alabama is left out. And then this whole thing kind of goes up in flames, because then there is a penalty to losing in your conference championship game, which is why I think that's the most unlikely outcome from today. I could see Notre Dame and Miami flipping. I think that's still unlikely, but I could see that happening. I still can't see Alabama falling out, because that's going to be one of your number one principles overall. And you still look at I know they didn't look great against OU. I know they didn't look great toward the end of the season. They certainly didn't look good yesterday. But you look at the entirety of their season and what they were able to accomplish. You said it yourself, they have the best win probably outside of the Big Ten championship game that anybody had during the season. And so I think that's why Alabama stays in. I don't think they stay at 9.
Is Indiana beating Ohio State on a neutral field a bigger win than Alabama beating Georgia at Georgia?
Oh,
I mean, it's debatable.
But
the point is,
I think you can have that discussion, but that's why they're in no danger.
Right.
I don't think that they could have lost that game 45-7 yesterday and still dropped out.
And I mean, you look at the SEC. This was, again, I know they lost. This was the number one team in the SEC at the end of the regular season, Alabama, and they lost to a team that they had already beat. I don't see Miami jumping Notre Dame to get in is far more likely than Alabama being the odd man out of these three teams. And for Miami to jump Notre Dame, the committee would essentially have to say, you know what, the last month we've had it completely wrong. We're idiots, and these teams haven't played, but we have. I mean, what it basically says is we've given in to public pressure.
What is there still any chance that we've talked about, we think it's unlikely that Oklahoma plays Alabama in the first round, and there is no penalty for Ohio State, for instance, losing, and they stay at 2, or they only move down to 2, whatever the case may be, that there is no penalty for Alabama. Is there any chance that Oklahoma plays Alabama again in the first round of
I
the playoff?
definitely think there's a chance. Like, I would not rule that out of the realm of possibility. I don't think it's likely. I think it's more likely that they play Alabama than Miami. I mean, again, because I think, like, there's just a greater chance Alabama's still going to be included than Miami's going to be included. If Miami gets in, though, like, they probably do jump all the way up to number 9. But I think there's definitely a chance. If I had to, like, I guess, divide the pie, I would say it's probably like 60% Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I'll go 25% Alabama, 15% Miami is the way I would look at that.
And the ultimate decision today, Notre Dame or Miami, you know how I feel about this. I think they gave themselves permission to leave Notre Dame in this because of
Yeah.
Alabama's inclusion
Yeah.
and because of where they put Notre Dame the last couple of weeks. I think they were telling us what they were going to do there. But if they flip this year, certainly it's justifiable. They played, after all. But how do you justify what you've told us the last couple of weeks in terms of where they were and why only now you are examining the head-to-head matchup between the two?
Yeah, and I mean, you would have to, a lot would have to get shaken up. And again, I just think that in terms of self-preservation, there's so much at play here, and leaving the ACC out to me, on top of, I think, legitimate reasons for why they would leave Miami out, to me, that's probably the path of least resistance in terms of self-preservation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You leave Alabama out, and I think you have Greg Sankey on a warpath. And, I mean, the doomsday scenario that's been discussed for the last 5 years of the SEC, trying to dictate college football, not getting their way and saying, you know what, we're going to do our own thing. And that becomes a very real reality.
Because it's not just them. It is, and Texas Vanderbilt have no chance to get in, but they are so painfully close to getting in that you would have to talk about expansion or just something else completely different, because not only are you advocating for a team that played in your conference championship game, but also two other teams that you probably don't legitimately feel this, but you're hearing from them have legitimate arguments to be in the field that are certainly, and I think people just on the street, fans of college football outside of Texas and Vanderbilt think one or both are two of the better teams in college football this season.
And just one more point, and we'll bring Cameron Johnson on in a moment. One more point on that. I mean, Greg Sankey would be mad if Alabama gets left out. I think there's already going to be a spot within him that burns over two group of 5 teams getting in when 10-2 Vandy is sitting at home. When, again, I don't think Texas deserves a spot, but they've certainly, I mean, with their wins, they should be in the conversation with any of those teams that are kind of on that bubble line at least. So, I mean, I think it's kind of a perfect storm for Greg Sankey to potentially go to war with the rest of college football. And again, he has, the power to do that with the brands underneath that umbrella, with the money they have, and I think, their ability to completely, I think, do something on their own and still get the ratings over the rest of college football if they wanted to do something like that. So it would be very interesting. Again, I think Alabama is going to get in, but I think they'll probably get the 10 seed and play, Texas A&M or Ole Miss or whoever the 7 seed ends up being. All right, let's bring in Cameron Johnson, who is my End Zone co-host from Tulsa. Cameron, when you woke up this morning, how did you feel about what the committee was going to do today?
Boy, they've got some tough decisions ahead of them, especially when you look at the biggest story of this year. I think right now that Miami, Alabama, Notre Dame, a lot of things to consider in there, and all, for the most part, really good points. But yeah, they've got their work cut out for them. I think this could be a really interesting next few minutes or so as we learn the field.
Cameron, in terms of Oklahoma, I think they feel pretty safe about where they are right now. Who do you anticipate is that first-round matchup for the Sooners this year?
Yeah, it comes down to Alabama or Notre Dame for me. I think both of those are great matchups for the Sooners. Personally, if you're a Sooners fan, I feel a little bit safer in the Alabama matchup. I mean, of course, it's the playoffs and anything can happen, but Alabama has not played as well down the stretch. Meanwhile, Notre Dame has played a lot better. So you look at a team that...
Oh, I think we may have lost Cameron, but we do have some... Okay, we will reconnect with Cameron. We do have some rankings to announce. The top 4 seeds in this college football playoff will be Indiana 1, Ohio State.
They left them there.
At 2, so they just flip-flopped the 2. Georgia is 3, Texas Tech is 4. Oregon is going to be the number 5 seed. They will host the 12 seed. Ole Miss does stay at number 6. They don't play the coach card. Ole Miss stays at number 6, and that probably means A&M is going to be 7, Oklahoma is going to be 8, as we anticipated.
Well, tell me about that. So they leave Ohio State in that 1-2 range. They do not fall behind a conference champion that we at least, I foresaw at least one moving ahead of whoever lost that game. But you do have to keep in mind that it was one versus number 2 in the country.
Yeah.
It was not a sizable margin
Right.
in that game. Came down to the end, so I can completely understand why they left Ohio State where they were. I'm sure the other two are thinking, hey, what reward do we get for winning our conference championship game? Would Georgia and Texas Tech have stayed at 3 and 4 if they would have lost those games? I guess the answer is yes.
All right, so it is official. Oklahoma is the number 8 seed. They will host the number 9 seed, and if they were to win, they would play Indiana in the Rose Bowl.
Oh, wow.
How about that?
That's awesome. Either one of them would have been a tremendous matchup. I think when you're looking at what happened this year, Ohio State with that victory over Texas, but Indiana going on the road in Eugene and winning that game,
Yeah.
and then of course what happened in the Big Ten championship game. Indiana had the best season that anybody did this season by that metric. And so an undefeated Indiana team in the Rose Bowl, how excited they would be just to be in that environment. I'm talking about Indiana, much less Oklahoma coming off of a win, so that would be absolutely incredible.
Fernando Mendoza's probably going to win the Heisman.
Yes.
After last night, he became the overwhelming favorite in Las Vegas sportsbooks. The last time Oklahoma was in the Rose Bowl, they had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, high-powered offense. They played a gritty defensive team that ran the football. Kind of role reversal if they were to get past their first-round opponent and play Indiana in the Rose Bowl. You have the Heisman Trophy, high-flying offense in Indiana. I do think their defense is much better than OU's was back then, but OU, I think, very much like that Georgia team.
Yeah.
Defense first, runs the football if they're going to be successful. I just think it's kind of funny how the tables have turned. Oklahoma's last real chance to make a postseason run, I'm not counting the year they played LSU because I didn't think they had any chance against that juggernaut of a team. But their last real chance to make a run in the postseason, they have kind of the same path, but the roles are completely reversed.
And look at this before we find out Oklahoma's opponent. Being able to play your first game on your home field, and not only how much of an advantage that is for you, just from an on-field standpoint, but how awesome that's going to be for everybody involved coming to the game too.
Alabama is the number 9 team in the college football playoff. We will have a rematch in Norman, Oklahoma, as the Crimson Tide are coming back to OU.
I'm glad I fit in that question there at the end, because you kind of have a feeling with, if we're not going to penalize one team for losing, and we can't really penalize any team. And so I knew there was an outside shot that Alabama was going to stay where they were. And I don't care if they've lost to Alabama twice. That's still going to be not only a tough competitor, and I still think people are going to be really, really excited for that matchup, considering the stakes that are at hand.
I would have rather seen Notre Dame, just because I think the brand that is Notre Dame, and I didn't necessarily want to see a rematch.
Right.
But in terms of the most winnable game, Oklahoma's already beat this team.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the team that's playing the worst football of the 3 options.
Yeah.
I think this is the best scenario for Oklahoma in terms of advancing and making a run at the national championship.
Perhaps the best case scenario. Not easy.
Not easy. No. I'm not suggesting that they're just going to.
I think if you asked Oklahoma fans who they would want to play, not from a prestige standpoint of not how cool it would be to see Notre Dame come back to Owen Field and play. I think if you asked them on advancement, they would probably say Alabama. But still, you never want to play the Crimson Tide in any situation.
All right. I'll let you guess. What do you think happens to the last spot? Notre Dame or Miami?
I think they're going to stay with Notre Dame based on what they've done the last couple of weeks. Neither result would shock me, but Miami would surprise me a little bit more. I'll characterize it that way. What about you?
Well, I know the answer. The College Football Playoff Committee has leapfrogged Notre Dame. Miami is the number 10 seed.
Wow.
I thought if Miami got in that. I thought there was a chance Miami would get in, but I didn't think it was super likely.
Especially not only now.
Right.
You know, if they were going to do it, at least figure out that this could be an argument that there would be two conference championship teams that would be in. I thought they kept Alabama as kind of a wedge between the two, but Alabama staying where they were, that kept them a little bit. That's where they were, right next to each other in the standings. I think that's why they had to leapfrog Miami.
The other weird thing about, I think the position the committee may have just put themselves in, they dropped Ohio State down behind Indiana because they just lost to them, but basically said, we're not going to move them down because they lost.
Right.
They did the same thing for Alabama. Alabama lost no spots in the ranking.
Right.
They're putting BYU down. If Miami is jumping Notre Dame, that means BYU is between Notre Dame and Miami. BYU just lost. That means that they moved BYU below Miami after losing a conference championship game because BYU was ahead of them in the last ranking.
Right. You're going to run into some hypocritical moments here with all of the shifting that you have to do. You just hope those moments are few, and you hope that you have the right explanation that is ready. But this is obviously, Notre Dame is a big-time entity in college football, and this is going to be an upsetting decision, not only their fan base, but also some people that are like, wait, what if we're in the same type of position here? The problem that they ran into is you have all these conversations of, man, I wish we could have seen them play. And they did. Yeah. They did see them play. And it was up to that matchup that helped propel Miami in.
So we have two first-round rematches, Tulane Ole Miss a rematch, OU Alabama a rematch. Okay. They avoid the Notre Dame Texas A&M rematch. Instead, it'll be the two teams that beat Notre Dame playing head-to-head now, A&M hosting Miami. All right, let's bring back Cameron Johnson. Cameron, I asked you what you thought was going to happen before we lost you earlier. Now everything is played out, and Oklahoma's going to host Alabama. What do you think of what the committee ultimately did?
Man, that's it. Like I said, in those few short moments, there were a lot of tough decisions to be made. I don't know, as far as the Notre Dame Miami thing, I think I heard you guys mention, you're going to have some hypocrisy in there every now and again with these decisions, but the fact that Notre Dame, that head-to-head matchup has not played a factor, and then all of a sudden it does today. Notre Dame's out, but of course that means OU faced with Alabama, a rematch. I think this is a great matchup for Oklahoma and a very winnable one. For starters, Alabama, like I said, has not played the greatest in these last few weeks, especially in the SEC championship yesterday, and especially the fact that OU went into Tuscaloosa and got that win earlier in the year when the Tide were playing better, and now they're going to come to Norman. It gives me full confidence in the Sooners to get a first-round win, most likely. Of course, history doesn't do much in the playoffs, so we'll see how it all shakes out.
Cameron, what were your thoughts on the decisions that were made for the rest of the bracket, both in front of OU and obviously behind them?
Yeah, I think obviously your top four was about what you'd expect, but there was a lot of, did I see James Madison got in there? So that's two.
That's right.
2 or 5 teams that made it in. And then you've got, there are quite a few teams that got left out that you could make a case for being the better team to make it in. Of course, that's just sometimes not the way it works out. So there's some surprise in there for sure. Again, Notre Dame being left out seems like a little bit of a snub to me. There's good cases for both. Ultimately, this was just a tricky situation, and hopefully it was the right decision.
When you look at their job, which is put the best teams in the playoff, right? Now, you can't actually put the 12 best teams in the playoff because of the automatic qualifiers, so I'm going to take that part out because there will be a lot of people that will say there were 10 teams that are better than both Tulane and James Madison, which I don't think any of us would disagree with, but they have to put 5 automatic qualifiers in. The way this played out, Tulane and James Madison are in. So take those 2 out. Outside of those 2, did they get the best 10 teams in? Do you think Notre Dame or Vanderbilt or Texas or BYU was better than either Alabama, Miami, or anybody else?
Better than Alabama, I'm not as sure. I'll hit on Notre Dame again. I think Notre Dame earlier in this season didn't look like a playoff team. They've played a lot better, more convincingly, but Alabama has the resume to back it up. So, I mean, you go into Athens, you beat Georgia, of course, then you lose to them in the SEC championship, so it kind of balances out there. I think Alabama making it to the SEC championship and doing what they did in the SEC, which is notoriously one of the toughest conferences, I think that saves them in this case. I think Notre Dame was the better team than Miami, possibly. Vanderbilt, I think, really did have a good case to get in there. But yeah, I think for the most part, it is a good group of teams, and we'll see some good matchups. I just think it could have gone either way on a lot of these.
What do you think about Oklahoma's road now? Alabama might have been the most desired matchup. It's still not going to be easy, but let's say Oklahoma does win on their home field and advance to play an Indiana team in round 2. This is Texas Tech and Oregon on that side of the bracket. Obviously playing the number 1 team in the country for a shot to go to the semifinals would be a really special event for Oklahoma football. What do you think about their road to a potential championship?
I think it all hangs on how the offense can respond in this first round. I mean, they have really been lacking in the previous few games. I think if OU can come out with a rejuvenated offense, they get that figured out, and you have the defense firing, I give them a better shot to navigate that road. But again, Indiana, especially after taking down Ohio State last night, that's a tough team to beat. It is a really tough road. It's doable, but OU has a lot of work cut out for them, and they're going to need to get it turned around quickly.
In terms of the first matchup, I mean, obviously, it's well documented that Oklahoma was outgained by nearly 200 yards on the road, but Oklahoma ultimately, won with defense and special teams. How much different do you think this game is from that one?
I think. Go ahead, Cameron.
I don't know that it's too different because OU's their last 3-4 games, it was the offense just being outgained and turnovers, and yet they're still able to hang in there defensively. I think maybe that's a little more the case this time around. So I don't know. I think it'll be relatively similar, but especially knowing that these teams know how to prepare for each other even more now that they have that first meeting under their belt. It'll be really interesting to see who kind of capitalizes off of those prior mistakes and takes advantage.
The last question for me, I asked this earlier, and it might be a different answer for everybody, but today is also, it's exciting to see where Oklahoma was going to end up, who they were going to play, but it's also kind of a celebration of this tremendous season that they've had so far this year. For you, what was the game, the moment that stood out to you where you thought, hey, that separated from Oklahoma is a really good team, they're having a good season, to wait a minute, this might be a special season this year?
I think I'll chalk it up to the Tennessee game. That was going to be a good game no matter what, but especially it being a night game at Neyland Stadium. That's a tough environment. OU has, I think that was another game where they were outgained by a lot. They gave up a lot of yards on defense, but they still had those turnovers. That's where you started to see that this was a team that knows how to overcome its mistakes. And that's really important, not even just in the SEC, but in a playoff scenario. It shows that you're not going to get rattled by those mistakes, and that if you can overcome them and turn it into a win, then you're a really good team. And OU has done just that.
Yeah, I can't decide whether it was Tennessee or Alabama. It almost feels like the right answer has to be a combination of the two.
Sure.
The Tennessee game looked like it was about to turn into a blowout, up to the point that Owen Heineke hits Joey Aguilar. He fumbles. R. Mason Thomas does the scoop and score, your favorite play in college football. And, he's hurt at that point, but that completely turned that game that felt like it was very quickly about to go over the edge for Oklahoma. And then all of a sudden that also opened up the turnovers that had not been there the entire season, and it's been an avalanche ever since then. But then you go to Alabama the following week, and at that point in time, Alabama was playing tremendous football, right? They were as good as anybody in college football, or at least perceived to be as good as anybody in college football. And Ty Simpson was among the favorites to win the Heisman Trophy. And if you looked at Oklahoma's previous 2 games, both Trinidad Chambliss and Joey Aguilar did really well through the air, and I thought Ty Simpson at that point in time might have been the best of those three. I now think it's Chambliss, but there was very much this like, if you protect Simpson, he's gonna eat you alive. They weren't able to protect him, and I thought Oklahoma's pressure really forced him into mistakes. But the combination of the two, I mean, there were moments in both of those games that you just thought like, how on earth is Oklahoma winning? And this is really turning into something that could become, something we look back on and think like, holy cow, like this all came to fruition.
Yeah, you want those for a team that is not overwhelming the competition that they play. You're looking for those sort of team of destiny moments.
Yeah.
And the fumble recovery against Tennessee was one of those moments for me. Also, early on defensively, the impact that they were making against Alabama just kind of had a different feel to it at that point.
Yeah, without a doubt. All right, Cameron, I guess before we let you go, final thoughts on Oklahoma as the number 8 seed hosting Alabama and just the college football playoff bracket overall.
Yeah, as far as Oklahoma, I think there's a little bit of positive in the fact that this was kind of what we expected for the last few weeks. It was between Notre Dame and Alabama. Now it's set. OU getting to play at home. What a special moment for the fans, the fan base to get to be a part of that. I think, again, it's a really winnable matchup, especially if they can get that offense going. Tough road, but OU's a tough team, so it'll be fun to watch what they do. And as far as the field as a whole, there are going to be a lot of good matchups we're going to see very quickly if the committee made those right decisions. But I think we're in for a really fun month of December and early part of January.
All right, it's going to be fun to talk about for the next couple weeks as we get ready for OU to play Alabama either December 19th or December 20th when that's ultimately announced. Cameron, appreciate it, and we'll catch up later. All right, there you go. Look, in terms of when they actually play, I believe ESPN/ABC has the Friday night and Saturday morning time slots, and I think the 2:30 and primetime Saturday time slots are TNT.
Oh, really? Okay.
If you look at the 4 games, OU Alabama, Miami A&M, Ole Miss Tulane, Oregon, James Madison, ESPN's going to get the first shot. OU, to me, is either playing Friday night or Saturday morning. I don't think there's any way OU Alabama ends up on TNT.
You would think so.
Yeah.
Because of the brand recognition and some of their competition there. I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about isolating the biggest game of the 4, OU Alabama is the Friday night game. If you want that to be the early game on Saturday before maybe a lot of fans start watching NFL football, I don't think there's any way that OU Alabama ultimately gets put in a time slot that's going to be opposite NFL football on Saturday when that's your biggest draw in terms of brand recognition.
Yes.
And I saw a graphic the other day that was like most watched football teams this year based on television ratings. Pretty sure Alabama was number 1. I think Texas might have been 2 or 3. OU was 4.
Yeah.
In terms of most watched college football programs this season. So you have 2 of the top 5 most watched brands this entire season going head to head.
And competitive level too.
Yeah,
I think the Miami game, that's going to be. I think that could be a really competitive game. I think it could be exciting. But I think when you look at OU and Alabama and what happened earlier this year, some people are excited for a rematch of that game. It did go down to the wire.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see. I thought there was a moment in the OU Alabama game where Ty Simpson had thrown the pick 6. He had started to, I think, rebound, and to me, just judging body language, I thought that he had rebounded and started to look confident again after that interception. And then they drive down the field, and there was a play where he throws an interception to Robert Spears-Jennings.
Yep.
The call was overturned because OU had holding on it or something like that. So Alabama kept the football. But I thought from that moment on, he didn't look as confident the rest of the night. And I thought at that point they had gotten in his head. I wonder how much he bounces back in this game because Oklahoma generated a ton of pressure on him. And I thought he just looked hesitant to deliver the football, especially after that second quote unquote interception.
In your mind, did that carry over into what you saw in the SEC championship game yesterday? Because you could say that when you don't face adversity, and what was he, like 25-1 touchdown to interception going into that game, the first time that you really experience that can rattle you, no matter how much experience you have, and then you can start to adjust to that when you feel it. And I wonder if that was still staying with him a bit yesterday. If that's the case, then I really like Oklahoma's chances to do that again.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would feel good about from watching action yesterday. If he came out, was settled down, kind of picked apart Georgia's offense, even if they didn't win, then you would think, okay, he's kind of adjusted to pressure. He might still be in that zone.
And they did a great job of protecting him in the first Georgia matchup. Really, and here's the interception to Eli Bowen early in the game, the pick six. This was the first quarter of the OU Alabama game. It was in the second quarter where Robert Spears-Jennings got the interception. I think it's coming up right here on the video. Yeah, here we go. Spears-Jennings gets it. Again, there was a penalty on this play and it was overturned, but I just thought visibly he looked rattled after that. OU got pressure on him all night. The next week, Auburn was able to really get a lot of pressure. Well, they played a nobody, I think Samford or somebody, the SEC, FCS November opponent following OU. But then Auburn got a lot of pressure on him. That was a tight matchup. He didn't play necessarily great football. And then Georgia in the SEC championship game yesterday, they were in the backfield the entire night. But, I mean, your final 3 big games of the season, he was under pressure, did not play well. That's not going to get any easier in this game, and you would anticipate it only gets tougher because OU didn't even have our Mason Thomas in that first matchup. But to me, that is a big part of this game. The mentality that he has, potentially facing this Oklahoma offense.
I think you're on
or defense.
No, I think you're on to something. I think Oklahoma's ability to run the football to make things a little bit more manageable for their offense is going to be important as well, because it's one thing to struggle offensively against a Missouri team that's just incorporating their quarterback back from injury, or a Louisiana State team that their season was kind of spiraling there. It's another thing to struggle early on in a game against an Alabama team that is certainly, I know they've struggled, but they're certainly more potent than those teams. That Alabama team is more apt to make a 10-0 or 14-0 run on you, so to speak. And put some pressure on you.
And, I think that first matchup, that was the game that Xavier Robinson took a big shot to his knees, and Torrey Blaylock took a big shot as Oklahoma was close to the goal line in one of those sequences. And that was the game that both those guys really got the injuries that prevented them from being big factors offensively in the final 2 home games. But if you get those 2 guys healthy and their ability to, stay healthy throughout the course of a game against Alabama, that adds another dimension. Again, Oklahoma was outgained by Alabama by nearly 200 yards. But I think once Oklahoma got the lead and maybe didn't have the availability of their running backs, I mean, at some point that becomes part of the way that you're coaching it to preserve a lead and let your defense, take the win home. But Xavier Robinson, I think, is the biggest aspect of this next matchup. His ability to be healthy by the time they actually play that game. And, I think when we think about Alabama football, it's easy to go back to the Nick Saban era and just think like suffocating defense. And I'm not at all suggesting that this Alabama defense isn't good, because they're still one of the top, I think, 10 to 20 defenses in college football. But the toughness and just, suffocating mentality that they played with under Nick Saban is long gone from this current regime, right? There is not that aura of like being bulletproof with Alabama
You're not
anymore.
Afraid of them when you play them. And I'm not suggesting that these athletes would be afraid of anybody, but you don't have that in the back of your mind. You're not subconsciously thinking about what they've done all season long and how dominant that they've been. You're right about that. They don't necessarily have that mystique that those other teams have had, but every single game that is played in any sport at any level, it all comes down to turnovers. And that's one of the biggest reasons, I think the biggest reason why Oklahoma won that first meeting with these 2 teams. Not only the interceptions that was thrown, the fumble, but the punt return, special teams that was caused as well. If Alabama can hang on to the football, this is going to be a really, really difficult game for OU to win.
The first loss of the season was the Texas game. John Mateer came back from the surgery. what did he throw, 4 interceptions in that game, or maybe it was 4 turnovers total. I can't remember. 4 turnovers total, but that lost them the game, right? I mean, it's until the punt return touchdown late in the fourth quarter. Despite all the turnovers, Oklahoma was still
in it,
in it, and had a chance to potentially win the game. And then the punt return, I think, just completely wiped that out. But despite the turnovers, they still had a shot in that game. You know, you go to the Ole Miss game, played in Norman. They had a chance to win that game. Ole Miss, it felt like, was in control. They generated a couple turnovers, got back in the game. The Satania fumble on the punt return is what turned the tide back to Ole Miss, and Ole Miss took the lead and then ultimately won the football game. But if you protect the football, again, don't put that defense in a bad situation. You got to like their chances in this one. And I'm not saying the defense has to score points like it did in Tuscaloosa with the pick six, but as long as you don't put that defense in bad situations, I think you're probably going to be okay.
And what you feel good about if you're a Sooners fan today is what you were talking about, and that is the floor is maybe a little bit higher than Alabama's floor is when you look at the way that they played this. Now, granted, that was against Georgia. The other game they lose was against Oklahoma, but that first week against Florida State. And the dynamics of the season have changed since then. But when Alabama is not playing well, you have a feeling that level is a little bit underneath where Oklahoma is when they're not playing well, just because Oklahoma's defense can keep them alive in games a little bit longer, and that really, really high level for Oklahoma. That might not be as high as Alabama's ceiling,
Yeah, I agree.
but it's still up there, and I would love to have a team with a higher floor than the other team.
Especially in a playoff type game when the stakes are at their greatest. As we projected, we do have the kick time. Oklahoma will host Alabama on Friday night, December 19th, 7 p.m. on ESPN and ABC. So we thought that ESPN, ABC getting the Friday night game, the Saturday morning game, OU Alabama would get one of those two.
Yep.
I kind of thought it was more likely to get Friday night because that's going to be the big stage. You don't have to worry about competing with the NFL. That's the way it goes. So the biggest matchup in terms of brands in this first round gets that spotlight game Friday night, the 8-9 matchup, OU Alabama. That's going to be a wild scene, prime time in Norman. By the way, OU has graduation that weekend. I know that hotels have been booked for months in Norman.
Oh, wow.
Like, restaurants are going to be, like, it's going to be, Norman, Oklahoma is going to be over capacity on that weekend. So if you're going to the game, I mean, you might want to plan on being in Norman around 11 a.m. for the 7 p.m. kickoff because it's going to be absolutely wild. But I'm just... You think about Alabama being the obstacle in a postseason matchup on your home field in prime time on a Friday night after the years of the 11 a.m. kickoffs, like just all the things that line up for this to be like a really special night in Norman are absolutely in play.
No, it's going to be a fantastic night. No matter what the result, Oklahoma fans obviously hope that they're moving on to play Indiana in the Rose Bowl. But you think about the move back to the SEC, and at the time, you're starting to tug the collar a little bit maybe and say, was this the right move? And now, even from where we started this season to look at where you're at right now, playing in a home game in the college football playoff against an opponent that you played in the regular season and already defeated with a big-time brand coming into town, and even some of the potential matchups that we talked about there. What a tremendous season for Oklahoma football, and hopefully the catalyst for either a good run this year or to appear again next year.
I'm not a betting man at all because I value keeping my money, and I know that if I went down that road, I would lose it all. But that doesn't keep me from being wildly infatuated with point spreads and totals and all that good stuff. I keep looking for an early projection. I've not seen anything yet. In fact, almost everything had already put out projections for OU Notre Dame, thinking that was going to be the first round matchup. So I haven't seen a point spread yet for what Oklahoma might. I would assume they will be a small favorite over Alabama in this matchup, but I've not yet seen a point spread. But either way,
I think it's going to be very slight. I think it might be around a field goal.
My initial thought was probably Oklahoma minus 3.5.
Yeah,
2.5 to 3.5 would be my guess.
In that range.
The hook just to kind of be within a field goal. is kind of my perception of that.
I could definitely see that.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us. The college football playoff reveal is complete. Oklahoma is not only in the field, they are the number 8 seed. They will host a home game on Friday, December 19th, 7 p.m. kickoff, hosting the Alabama Crimson Tide, who they beat back on November 15th in Tuscaloosa. We appreciate everybody watching. Thanks to Gideon Hamilton. Thanks to Colin Kennedy and Cameron Johnson. I'm Colby Daniels. Everybody enjoy your week as we prepare for Oklahoma, Alabama in just a couple weeks' time.